To the outside world, Bath conjures up images of the Roman baths, elegant streets, and the famous authors such as Jane Austen. The city fathers wish to convey this wholesome image and have been very successful with a reported 1 million visitors a year. As the city has only over 100,000 residents, the tourist ratio may not be on a par with Lord's or Venice, but still respectable. However, the residents are human and have the virtues and vices of all Homo sapiens. One of these is murder, and the events of 1951 illustrate this fact. What makes it more gruesome was the willful murder of children by a stranger. Over to you, James.
It's the summer of 1951 in the West Country city of Bath, but the hot, dry months brought a creeping terror as an unseen killer sought out children, claiming 3 innocent young lives within the month. This is the horrifying and true story of serial killer John Thomas Strafford, who stalked the children of Bath. He went on to be the longest-serving prisoner in British legal history. Strafford was born into a military family in Borden, Hampshire, spending his early years in India, as his father was in the British Army. In 1938, when the family returned to England, they moved to a house in Bath. The move proved problematic for Strafford, as he kept getting into trouble and scrapes, so much so that he was sent to a special educational school in an attempt to correct his waywardness. At the age of 10, he was sent to a place that was experienced with children with learning difficulties, or backward children, as it was termed in those days. It was at this school on July the 27th, 1947, that a 13-year-old girl reported to the police that a boy called John had accosted her, and with his hand over her mouth whispered in her ear the chilling words, "What would you do if I kill you? I've done it before." A few weeks later, Strafford was discovered to have strangled 5 chickens, the property of the father of the girl he had threatened. When he was arrested, he calmly confessed to the crime, as well as several other low-level misdemeanours in the area. The magistrates' court remanded him in custody at Bristol Prison, where the medical officer examined him, stating that the prisoner was feeble-minded. Eventually he was committed to the 1924-built Horsham Idiot Colony in Bristol, which was described at the time to be the first purpose-built institution under the 1913 Mental Health Act for the case of the mentally impaired. It housed up to 600 patients. He was released under licence in 1951 and returned to Bath to live. It was on July the 15th of that year that a 6-year-old girl called Brenda Goddard, who was picking flowers in a field behind her home in the city, when Strafford, who by now was 21 years old, came across her. For whatever reason, they struck up a conversation, and Brenda accompanied Strafford into the nearby woods, where he put his hands around her neck and strangled her to death. While the police were looking into this tragic incident, Strafford was brought in for interview, as his reputation preceded him, in connection to the girl's murder. He admitted that he had been in the vicinity of the woods where the body was found, but there was no direct evidence against him, so he was released. Perversely, he would later tell the police that he had committed the crime in order to give them, as he put it, something to really do, instead of going after him for minor offences. It was a few days later that he went to the Forum Cinema in Bath and got talking to a 9-year-old schoolgirl called Cicely Batstone, presumably in the queue for the ticket office, as he persuaded her to go to another cinema with him. They caught a bus across the city, and Strafford took her to a spot known to the locals as the Tumps, and it was there that he cold-bloodedly strangled her to death. Over the subsequent days, he was picked up by the police on suspicion of committing a series of minor offences, and when locked up in the cells of the police station, whiling away the time, for some unexplained reason asked for the detective in charge of the Batstone murder inquiry, and summarily made a full confession to the murder. "I sat behind her," he said. "It only took a couple of minutes and she was dead. I took her by surprise." He was formally arrested and charged with the poor child's murder and committed for trial at Taunton Crown Court. It was on October the 17th he was found to be certifiably insane and unfit to plead a trial that he would otherwise have faced, the judge stating, "You might as well try a babe in arms." Such was Stratton's impairment. The accused was detained in hospital until His Majesty's pleasure is known. His stay at the hospital was woefully short because around 2:40 in the afternoon on April the 29th, 1952, he absconded over the wall, and although the alarm had been sounded due to the escape, enjoyed a few hours of freedom. He was captured around 7 miles away from the hospital in a place called Aberfield at around 6:40 in the evening. It was at 10:30 that night 5-year-old Linda Bowyer from the village was reported missing. After a hastily organised search by the police and the locals, a body was soon discovered. She'd been strangled, just as Stratton's other 2 young victims had been, and almost the entire country understandably came to the one and obvious conclusion. However, some events that played out over the following days have cast a question mark over whether Stratton had any involvement in her death. He was brought to trial at Winchester Assizes for the murder of Linda Bowyer, and the first task for the prosecution was to argue, notwithstanding the findings of the previous court hearing, that the accused was indeed fit to plead. Somehow the judge agreed to this. As the trial proceeded with the prosecution's case, the first witnesses were called to give their evidence so that the full facts could be known about the Aberfield murder. Further evidence was called for concerning the 2 earlier child murders in Bath. This part of the case was strongly resisted by Stratton's defence, who called it prejudicial. However, the judge deemed that the evidence was indeed permissible and it could be important to the trial. On the second day, the judge delayed the start of proceedings, and when he did appear in the courtroom, he declared that owing to the alleged conduct of one of the jurors, he was compelled to discharge them and get a fresh jury sworn in. It transpired that one of the original jurors had gone to a club of some description in Southsea the previous evening, where he foolishly revealed that he was part of the jury in the now infamous Stratton trial. He declared that the accused was clearly innocent, and that in fact it was one of the prosecution's witnesses that had committed the crime. It came as no surprise that the trial was ceased, and had to start from the beginning all over again, with a new jury sworn in. Full credit to the judge for coming to his conclusion. On July the 25th, 1952, Stratton was found guilty of all 3 murders and sentenced to death by hanging, the date being set for the following September the 4th. Case closed, an end of a harrowing saga, you may think. But a little over a month later, the accused was reprieved by the Home Secretary at the time, Sir David Maxwell Fyfe, on the grounds of insanity. Over the course of 12 months, the authorities had declared Stratton insane, sane, and then finally insane again. So it was that the murderer was spared the hangman's noose and jailed for life with no hope of release. Fast forward to the year 2001, and Stratton's solicitors called for the case to be reopened on the basis that the convicted murderer had never been fit to stand trial in the first place. His case was also taken up by an investigative journalist who used previously unknown and undiscovered confidential records that concluded that Stratton was given a reprieve from his death sentence after a number of doctors had each concluded that he was, in fact, insane under the meaning of the Mental Health Act. It was contested that doubt could be cast on who the killer Linda Bowyer actually was, as the post-mortem report noted that in addition to the marks around her neck from strangulation, there were marks on her body caused by fingernails. Somewhere along the line, it had also been noted that Stratton habitually chewed his nails down to the quick. Very curious, as well as a local witness who had stated that a girl's screams had been heard at a time after Stratton had been apprehended after his escape. Coincidental? Maybe. But the application to reopen the case was turned down in December 2002. Stratton died in prison on November the 19th, 2007, at the age of 77, and held the dubious record of being Britain's longest-serving inmate, having lived behind bars for 55 years. Now, John, a complicated set of events. What's your take on this?
Unless you are an extreme libertarian, It is obvious that a monster like Strafford should have been locked up for his own sake and that of society. When we read of similar incidents, most of us cannot deny that we initially believe a lynching party is in order. We live in more enlightened times, and we leave this to the judicial system. Nevertheless, the judicial system has its own drawbacks. Some may argue that he had been found guilty twice, and there was no need for a third trial. But the police are human too, and just want the case cleaned up, so as to stem public anger. In Strafford's case, there are doubts as to his guilt on the third murder. There is the question of the bereaved family, or a member who is escaping justice. Unless there is a trial, there is always the doubt that a patsy has been targeted and the real villain has got away. If you would like to know more about this episode and the other West Country murders in this series, you can visit our website vintagemurders.uk or on our YouTube channel.